So looking at the issue of adverse childhood experiences in relation to de-escalation and trying to reduce the use of force. So adverse childhood experiences is commonly known as ACEs. So treating distress or behaviours of concern as communicative acts and exploring what this means for the person to help avoid the use of restrictive interventions could be beneficial to your workplace. And whether you're in an education establishment, a mental health unit, secure custody sector, it's of value to understand issues around adverse childhood experiences, because otherwise your attempts to de-escalate might actually be triggering the person. So we need to understand a little bit about ACEs. Now, if someone has 4 or more ACEs, then it's believed that they're 6 times more likely to suffer from mental illness, which means then that a large proportion of people in any mental health unit are likely to have had a significant amount of ACEs in their background. Also, 9 times more likely to experience feeling suicidal or to self-harm. So again, knowing that information and knowing a bit about the background of the person could then provide information in relation to the decision-making model around increased risk for suicide as part of the triggers. Now, the College of Policing, for example, have a definition here of ACEs, and they take this from the NHS definition. Adverse childhood experiences are traumatic experiences that occur before the age of 18 and are remembered throughout adulthood and can have negative consequences. These experiences range from suffering verbal, mental, sexual and physical abuse, to being raised in a household where domestic violence, alcohol abuse, parental separation or drug abuse is present. Now, it's not a new concept in relation to the secure sector, and although we now more commonly talk about the phrase ACEs, even if we just look back at a little bit of history in relation to the safer detention and handling of persons in police custody, the 2006 guidance in relation to suicide and self-harm, highlighted here in yellow, adverse childhood experiences is a trigger for increased risk of suicide in custody. The current app in relation to detention and custody for police custody states, when an officer makes an arrest, they are personally responsible for the risk assessment and welfare of the detained person. This responsibility continues until the suspect is handed over to the custody officer for a decision regarding detention. Risk assessment means assessing the risk and potential risk that each detainee presents to themselves, staff, other detainees and other people coming into the custody suite. The dynamic nature of the incident and the process of arrest may have a bearing on the assessment, which, by its very nature, is likely to be continuous and needs to respond to changing situational requirements. It may be impractical for this assessment to be written, but must be documented at the earliest opportunity. Officers must be aware that they have a continuing responsibility and duty of care to the detained person and must assess their environment and the impact of their actions. Now, again, looking at factors which may indicate the increased risk. So it was first mentioned in the 2006 guidance, and here it is now in the current guidance as well, still saying adverse childhood experiences is a factor which may indicate an increased risk. Now, thinking about this in some practical terms. So an example case which I was involved in relation to the sector and the use of force and how things all escalated out of control. We have a service user who is a young person, and in their earlier life, they were removed from their family home because of significant abuse which occurred to them. And this included physical assaults and locking the person in the understairs cupboard. So they had significant triggers around use of force and being detained in a room or a dark space. So as part of their care plan, it indicated in there that force should never be used on this person unless it's absolutely essential, so such as the life of the person is at risk or somebody else, because to use force on the person or to isolate them will trigger significant emotional response. So this particular day, we have this person who is getting up the assault cycle into the arousal, and they're being triggered. Now they then try to take themselves off, but obviously in certain sectors, the people can't just go off home and calm down. So this person, they're contained in this room with other people. So instead they go and walk behind an object in order to just visually take themselves away from the other people. But the member of staff who is working regular with this person knows nothing about their past abuse. And so they then say to the person in a critical parent mode about, come back from around there and join back in the group or else. So this person does not respond to them in any way, and they remain stood behind this object. Now they're not causing any damage or any self-harm. So the member of staff moves around to look at them and says words to the effect, get back to the chair and table, or I will call another member of staff and we will take you out of the room by force. Now, that wasn't a good de-escalation example. And so this person still remains static. They're still not offering any violence to the member of staff or any damage to the property. So the member of staff calls for another member of staff. So this second member of staff now enters, and without any attempt to de-escalate this person, they then apply force and remove them by force from the room. So as they're attempting to remove them by force, this person then responds to their force and starts thrashing about and trying to break free from the two members of staff, who, in response to this, call for another member of staff. So now we've got three members of staff who are physically handling this person with force and dragging them out. They then get taken to another room, so in effect into isolation, and the three members of staff restrain this person until they are exhausted and can no longer fight. They then leave the person and lock them in the room to calm down and give them time to think. Now, the issue all around this is, for one, this could have been completely avoided. Secondly, we've got then force used on the person, which in effect is an assault because it wasn't necessary at all. And then thirdly, we've got the issue of false imprisonment. So that was an example of a case that I was involved in, and this was settled out of court. So we never got the court's decision, but it was settled in favour of the claimant, who was the young person. But think about that, and think about if the staff members had understood what was in the care plan of this particular person, would they have responded in that way? If they understood that this person as a child had been physically abused and locked in rooms as part of the punishment, would they have still opted for this method of dealing? So it's one thing having this information in a care plan, but then from a duty of care point of view, any member of staff who is likely to be dealing with this person in their role needs to be aware of it, because they need to know about it for the assessment of risk and provide care to that person, but also for themselves, because if they're aware of certain things, they don't want to be doing that and putting themselves at risk as well. And this could have all been resolved by alternative methods had staff understood the service user that they were dealing with and looked at the de-escalation models and the preventative side, rather than just instantly going to critical parent mode, the threat of using force, and then using force without any realistic attempts at trying to de-escalate.